Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. As you know, there are several things going on tonight with this show.
Johnny Carson spent decades as the calm center of late-night television. Every night, millions tuned in expecting smooth jokes, easy laughs, and total control. But behind that polished surface were moments that went far beyond television charm. In this video, we look at the most intense confrontations tied to Carson's name, including the one that pushed everything closest to a breaking point. Join us as we step into the moments that changed how people saw the king of late night, Joan Rivers. In the early years of her career, Joan Rivers relied heavily on Johnny Carson and The Tonight Show. At a time when few female comedians were given national exposure, Carson gave her repeated spots on his show. Those appearances helped her build a name, grow her audience, and gain credibility in a tough industry. Over time, she became more than just a guest. Carson trusted her enough to let her guest host, something very few performers were allowed to do. Because of that visibility and trust, many people in television began to see Rivers as the natural choice to eventually replace Carson. She wasn't just another comedian anymore, she was closely tied to his brand. Everything changed in 1986. Rivers was offered her own show on a new network, The Late Show starring Joan Rivers. It was a major step forward, and she would become the first woman to host a late-night talk show on a major network. But the way it unfolded caused problems. The deal came together quickly, and she was told the news would leak soon. Instead of calling Carson directly, she chose to stay silent until the announcement became public. From her side, it was a rushed decision under pressure. From Carson's side, it felt like betrayal. After the news broke, Rivers tried to call Carson to explain. The conversation didn't last long. Carson reportedly cut her off and hung up before she could finish. That moment ended their relationship instantly. There was no follow-up, no attempt to talk things through. A connection built over decades disappeared in a matter of seconds. The consequences were long-lasting. Rivers was no longer welcome on The Tonight Show. That absence lasted 26 years. Even after Carson retired, the distance remained. In the entertainment world, Carson held a lot of influence, and his silence carried weight. While there was no official ban announced, the message was clear. Rivers' career continued, but the loss of that platform changed her path significantly. Years later, Rivers spoke openly about how deeply this affected her. She described Carson as a mentor and even a father figure, which made the rejection personal, not just professional. She never fully got over it. Carson, on the other hand, rarely addressed the situation. He kept his distance and never showed interest in repairing the relationship. And this wasn't the only time Carson's private feelings turned into public fallout. Don Rickles. The moment started with something small but meaningful. On the desk of Johnny Carson sat a wooden cigarette box he used regularly during The Tonight Show. It wasn't just a prop. It was part of his routine, something familiar that added to his on-screen presence. During a night when Don Rickles was guest hosting, he handled the box and accidentally broke the lid. Rickles didn't mean to damage it. He treated it casually, the way he treated most things, with humor and little concern. But for Carson, it mattered. When he returned and saw the damage, he wanted to know exactly what happened. Once he learned Rickles was responsible, he didn't brush it off. He saw an opportunity to respond in a very public way. Instead of confronting Rickles privately, Carson chose a different route. At the time, Rickles was filming his sitcom CPO Sharkey on a nearby set. Carson waited for the right moment, then walked straight onto that set while filming was in progress. Cameras were rolling, and the audience had no idea what was about to happen. Carson entered, holding the broken box, calm but clearly focused. This wasn't random. The timing showed intent. He wanted the confrontation to be seen, not hidden. By stepping into Rickles' space, he turned a simple mistake into a live moment of tension. When Carson appeared, Rickles was caught off guard. His reaction was immediate. He looked confused, then nervous, and then tried to recover by making jokes. The audience didn't know if this was planned or real. At first, there was hesitation. People weren't sure how to react. Then Carson spoke directly to Rickles, asking about the broken box in a serious tone. The tension built quickly, but it didn't stay uncomfortable for long. Rickles began to respond in his usual style, joking and trying to lighten the situation. As the exchange continued, the audience shifted from confusion to laughter. What started as a surprise turned into a moment of live entertainment that felt unpredictable and real. Even though the scene was funny, there was something deeper happening. Carson was making a point. By confronting Rickles in front of a live audience, on his own set, he showed who was in control. He didn't raise his voice or lose his temper, but his presence alone carried weight. Rickles, who was known for putting others on the spot, was now the one being challenged. The humor made it easier to accept, but the message was clear. Carson set the boundaries, and no one crossed them without consequence. At the same time, the moment stayed just within the limits of entertainment. It didn't turn into a real argument, but it came close enough to feel intense. That balance is what made it unforgettable. But not every confrontation stayed this controlled. One would come much closer to turning into something real. Wayne Newton. For years, Johnny Carson used his monologue to take shots at Wayne Newton. At first, it sounded like the usual late-night teasing, but the tone started to change. Carson's jokes didn't just poke fun at Newton's career. They questioned his masculinity and hinted at connections to organized crime. These weren't light remarks anymore. They felt personal and damaging. Each joke added pressure. Newton stayed quiet for a while, but the repeated comments built frustration. What the audience heard as humor, Newton experienced as public disrespect. Instead of responding through the media, Newton chose a direct approach. He went to NBC studios and asked to see Carson face to face. This wasn't planned for cameras. There was no audience, no script, and no intention to entertain. When Newton entered Carson's office, the tone was serious from the start. He wasn't there to joke or laugh anything off. He wanted the comments to stop, and he made that clear immediately. Carson, who was used to controlling conversations on his show, was now in a very different situation. During the confrontation, Newton reportedly told Carson to stop mentioning him entirely. The message was direct and firm. There was no humor in his words. According to several accounts, the tension in the room rose quickly. Voices were raised, and the situation came close to turning physical. This wasn't a playful exchange like Carson had with other comedians. It felt like a real threat. Newton made it clear there would be consequences if the jokes continued. For Carson, this was unfamiliar territory. Most people accepted or ignored his jokes. Newton challenged him directly, without hesitation. The result was immediate. Carson stopped using Newton's name in his monologues. There was no gradual change. The jokes ended almost overnight. For someone known for pushing boundaries and standing by his material, this was unusual. Carson rarely backed down once he started targeting someone. In this case, he did. That quick shift showed how seriously he took the confrontation. Newton didn't go public with the incident or try to turn it into a media story. He got the result he wanted and moved on. What made this moment stand out was the setting. There was no audience to soften the tension or turn it into entertainment. There were no cameras to shape the interaction. It was direct and personal. Without that layer of performance, the situation felt more real and more unpredictable. This wasn't about getting laughs or winning over viewers. It was about setting a boundary and enforcing it. That's why it came closer to actual violence than any other conflict tied to Carson. Not every conflict ended with raised voices, though. One of them played out quietly, but left a lasting mark. Raymond Burr. Raymond Burr was a respected actor known for strong, serious roles. But on The Tonight Show, Johnny Carson often turned him into the subject of jokes about his weight. These comments came up again and again in monologues. At first, they may have sounded like typical late-night humor, but the repetition made them feel targeted. The audience laughed, but Burr was being singled out for something personal. Over time, the jokes shifted from light teasing to public embarrassment. Burr didn't react publicly. Instead, he tried to handle the situation quietly. People close to him said he reached out behind the scenes and asked for the jokes to stop or at least slow down. He wasn't asking for attention or making a scene. He simply wanted respect, but nothing changed. The jokes continued, which made it seem like his concerns weren't being taken seriously. Whether the message didn't reach Carson or was dismissed, the result was the same. Burr felt ignored. When Burr returned to the show for what would become his final appearance, Everything looked normal on the surface. He was polite, professional, and calm during the interview. There was no sign of tension for the viewers watching at home. He answered questions, played along, and kept the mood steady. But off camera, his decision had already been made. He wasn't going to come back again. Instead of confronting Carson directly, he chose a quieter way to respond. After that appearance, Burr simply stopped accepting invitations. There was no public statement and no dramatic exit. He just stayed away. Over time, his absence became noticeable. A regular guest was suddenly gone with no explanation given on air. This approach sent a clear message without creating a scene. Carson had no argument to respond to, no conflict to address in front of an audience. The silence made it harder to dismiss. This situation stood out because it didn't follow the pattern of Carson's other conflicts. There was no shouting, no confrontation, and no public moment of tension. Burr's silence became his way of pushing back. By stepping away, he showed that he would not accept being treated as a joke. For Carson, this kind of response was difficult to handle. He couldn't turn it into comedy or control the narrative. The absence said everything without a single word. And while Burr chose silence, the next clash would explode right in front of millions watching at home. War with the New York Times. In 1980, the New York Times published a report claiming that Johnny Carson was earning around $25 million a year. At the time, that number shocked people. For many viewers, it confirmed how powerful and successful Carson had become. Some admired it, while others saw it as excessive. Public reaction was mixed, but Carson's response was very different. He was frustrated, not flattered. He believed the number was inaccurate and felt the article made him look greedy. For someone who carefully managed his public image, this kind of exposure hit a sensitive point. Instead of ignoring the story, Carson chose to respond where he had the most control, his own show. That night, when he stepped onto the stage, the mood was different. He held a copy of the newspaper and began addressing the article directly. This wasn't his usual style. His tone was sharp and his words were clear. He criticized the report, calling it unfair and misleading. The audience expected jokes, but what they got was something more serious. Carson wasn't trying to entertain in that moment. He was defending himself. As the monologue continued, the shift in tone became more obvious. Carson's usual calm and playful delivery was gone. His sarcasm felt heavier, and his expressions showed real irritation. He wasn't smiling through the lines. Instead, he focused on pointing out what he believed were mistakes in the article. For viewers, it was unusual to see him like this. He had built a reputation on being relaxed and in control, but now he seemed personally affected. The humor was still there in parts, but it was mixed with clear frustration. This situation mattered so much to Carson because it touched on control. For years, he had carefully shaped how people saw him. He presented himself as grounded and relatable, even while being one of the highest-paid figures on television. The article challenged that image. By publishing details about his earnings, it took part of that control away from him. Carson feared that people would judge him based on that number instead of his work. He didn't like the idea of being defined by a headline he didn't agree with. That's why he reacted so strongly and chose to address it in front of millions of viewers. This moment showed a different side of Carson. He wasn't just a host telling jokes. He was someone who cared deeply about how he was seen and was willing to push back when he felt misrepresented. It was one of the rare times where his public and private feelings came together on live television. But while this clash played out in front of an audience, the next conflict would hit much closer to home and hurt far more. Carson versus his son. Behind the success of Johnny Carson was a private life that few people truly understood. While he connected easily with audiences, his relationship with his children was more distant. His demanding schedule, combined with a very reserved personality, created space between him and his sons. Over time, that distance turned into emotional disconnect. Conversations were limited, and unresolved feelings built up quietly. Rick, one of his sons, struggled with that distance more openly. He wanted a closer relationship, but the gap between them never fully closed. This tension didn't come from one moment. It developed slowly over years of missed chances and unspoken frustration. In 1987, NBC organized a major celebration for Carson's 25th anniversary on The Tonight Show. The event was filled with celebrities, executives, and people who admired his work. On the surface, it was a night of praise and recognition, but behind the scenes, things took a different turn. Rick attended the event, and emotions were already running high. What should have been a proud moment quickly became something else. At some point during the gathering, a private conversation between father and son began to escalate. People who were present described the situation as intense and uncomfortable. The conversation turned into an argument, and voices were raised. This wasn't a quiet disagreement. It became loud enough that others nearby noticed. Reports suggest that both Carson and Rick were visibly upset. Rick didn't hold back, and Carson responded with equal force. The exchange moved beyond words at moments, with some accounts saying it came close to turning physical. Even though no actual fight broke out, the tension was strong enough to make it feel possible. For those who saw it, the moment stood out because it showed a side of Carson rarely seen in public. He wasn't the calm, controlled host. He was a father in a heated conflict with his son. After the argument, the mood of the night changed for Carson. Instead of enjoying the celebration, he became withdrawn. Some reports say he left early, shaken by what had happened. The impact didn't fade with time. The relationship between Carson and Rick did not recover. They remained distant, and there was no clear effort to repair things. Sadly, Rick died in a car accident in 1991. That loss ended any chance of reconciliation. For Carson, it left behind a situation that could never be resolved. This incident was different from his other conflicts because it was deeply personal. There were no cameras, no audience, and no performance. It was a private struggle that became visible for a brief moment. It showed that even someone who appeared composed on television could face serious challenges in his personal life. And while this fight stayed mostly hidden, the next clash would explode in a very public and unforgettable way. Jacqueline Susann. When Jacqueline Susann appeared on The Tonight Show, the conversation didn't start on equal ground. Johnny Carson introduced her with a tone that felt dismissive. He made light remarks about her best-selling novel, Valley of the Dolls, suggesting it was more sensational than serious. The audience laughed, but the tone carried a sense of judgment. Susann was used to critics questioning her work, but hearing it framed that way on national television by the host himself set the tone for what followed. As the interview continued, the comments became sharper. Carson didn't just stay focused on her writing. He shifted toward remarks about her appearance. Some accounts recall him making a cutting comment that felt out of place for a simple interview. The mood changed quickly. What had started as a promotional appearance began to feel uncomfortable. These weren't light jokes anymore. They felt direct and personal. For Susann, who had built her success despite constant criticism, this moment crossed a line. Even with the tension building, Susann didn't react openly on the show. She stayed composed, answered questions, and kept her tone steady. She smiled when needed and continued the conversation without raising her voice. Viewers at home may not have fully realized how uncomfortable the exchange had become. That control mattered. She didn't give Carson or the audience a dramatic reaction in that moment. Instead, she finished the interview professionally, even though the tension was clear beneath the surface. The real confrontation came later, away from the cameras. At a gathering after the show, Susann approached Carson directly. There was no audience and no performance this time. She faced him and responded to what had happened earlier. According to widely shared accounts, she didn't hold back. In a sudden move, she threw her drink, a Black Russian cocktail, right into Carson's face. The room went quiet. Carson was left stunned, soaked, and speechless. Susann didn't stay to argue or explain further. She made her point in that single moment and walked away. After that night, Susann did not return to The Tonight Show. There was no public announcement, but the result was clear. She was no longer invited back. Carson also didn't speak about the incident publicly. Like many of his conflicts, it stayed mostly behind the scenes, shared through reports and stories from those who were there. The situation showed that not everyone accepted being the target of his humor. In this case, the response was immediate and direct. This moment stood out because it flipped the usual dynamic. Carson, who often controlled the tone of every interaction, was suddenly on the receiving end of a very public reaction, even if it happened off camera. It was one of the rare times someone responded to him without hesitation or restraint. And while this clash ended with a splash, the next controversy would spark something much bigger than just one moment. Vanessa Williams. In 1984, Vanessa Williams made history by becoming the first black woman crowned Miss America. It was a major moment that meant a lot to many people. Shortly after her win, she appeared on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. During the monologue, Carson made a comment about the pageant's change, suggesting the outcome was more about shifting image than achievement. The line was meant to get a laugh, but it didn't land the way he expected. Instead of celebrating the milestone, the joke seemed to question it. Inside the studio, the reaction was mixed. Some people laughed, but it wasn't the usual confident response Carson was used to. There was hesitation. The laughter felt uncertain. Outside the studio, the response was stronger. Critics and viewers spoke out, saying the joke dismissed an important achievement. For many, it felt unfair and insensitive. The difference between the in-room reaction and the public response showed how quickly opinions could shift once the moment was seen in a wider context. Vanessa Williams handled the situation with calm and clarity. She later shared that the comment disappointed her. She explained that her win represented years of effort and meant something important for representation. Instead of reacting with anger, she chose to speak openly about how the joke affected her. Her response stayed focused and respectful, but it made her feelings clear. She didn't try to turn it into a bigger conflict. She simply explained why it mattered. Carson's response was more restrained. Reports suggest he recognized privately that the joke had gone too far. However, he didn't address it in a strong or public way on his show. There was no major on-air apology or extended discussion. He moved forward without revisiting it directly. This created a contrast between the impact of the moment and the way it was handled afterward. This situation stood out because it showed how a single joke could carry more weight than expected. It wasn't just about humor. It touched on wider issues that were becoming more visible at the time. For Carson, it was a reminder that not every topic could be treated the same way. And while this moment stirred public reaction, the next chapter would revisit an old conflict that had been left unresolved for decades. Rivers comes back. For more than 2 decades, Joan Rivers was absent from The Tonight Show. That long gap began after her fallout with Johnny Carson and continued even after he retired. Then in 2014, everything changed. Jimmy Fallon, who had just taken over as host, invited Rivers back. It was a major shift. The invitation ended years of quiet exclusion and signaled that the show was ready to move forward. For viewers who remembered the original conflict, this moment felt unexpected. It wasn't just another guest booking. It carried history with it. When Rivers returned, she didn't avoid the past. She spoke openly about what had happened between her and Carson. She described how much his reaction had hurt her, both personally and professionally. She explained that losing him as a mentor was one of the hardest moments of her life. Her words were honest and direct. She didn't try to soften the story or turn it into a joke. By talking about it so openly, she gave the audience a clearer understanding of how deep the impact had been. Even while sharing her pain, Rivers also expressed respect for Carson. She acknowledged that he played a huge role in launching her career. Without his early support, she may not have reached the same level of success, but that respect existed alongside lingering hurt. The two feelings didn't cancel each other out. She could appreciate what he had done for her while still feeling the damage from how things ended. That mix of gratitude and unresolved emotion made the moment feel real. It wasn't a simple story of forgiveness. One key detail shaped the entire situation. Carson wasn't there. He had passed away years earlier, so there was no chance for a direct reunion. That absence mattered. Rivers could reflect on the past, but she couldn't speak to him or hear his side again. The tension remained, even as the show welcomed her back. The audience saw a form of closure, but it wasn't complete. it was more about recognition than resolution. The show moved forward, but the history behind it didn't disappear. This return stood out because it showed how long certain conflicts can last. Even after years have passed, the feelings connected to them can remain strong. Rivers' appearance didn't erase the past, but it brought it back into focus in a new way. It allowed people to see both the success and the struggle behind her story. And just when it seemed like things had settled, Carson's final days on air would prove he still had one last fight left in him. The final argument. When Johnny Carson prepared to step away from The Tonight Show in 1992, the mood was mostly celebratory. Guests came in to honor his long career, and the episode was designed as a respectful goodbye. For many viewers, it felt like a historic moment coming to a close. But as the night went on, the tone shifted slightly. What was meant to be a warm reflection on his years in television slowly picked up a sharper edge. The mix of admiration and reflection created space for more honest conversation than usual. Among the guests was a younger comedian who represented a new direction in late-night comedy. During the conversation, the topic turned to how television was changing. The younger voice suggested that the style Carson built his career on was becoming less relevant. The comment wasn't aggressive, but it was direct. It pointed to a shift in audience expectations and a new generation of hosts taking over. The discussion moved from friendly reflection into something more serious. The contrast between generations became clear, and the tone in the room tightened. Carson didn't ignore the comment. He responded firmly, defending the approach that had defined his career for decades. He made it clear that he didn't agree with the idea that his style was outdated. While he acknowledged that television was changing, he resisted the suggestion that his work no longer mattered. His response was controlled, but it carried weight. He wasn't speaking as a guest or a retired figure. He was speaking as someone who had built the space they were all standing in. If you want more stories like this, hit subscribe, like the video, and stay tuned for what comes next.